So what does this mean? Well, just a couple of examples of data. For example, one of the things for customer-focused innovation, when we look at those people who are doing better in customer-focused innovation, what we found is that a huge percentage of those who were at world-class performance in this area were investing at far higher rates in R&D and new product development. Not surprisingly, because they're investing more in R&D and new product development, these folks were far more likely to have a much higher percentage of their sales from products that were new, sales from products that were less than 3 years old. So there's lots of data. I'm not going to go into the data right now, but there's lots of data to look at that says that if you want to be better, for example, in customer-focused innovation, invest more in R&D, you're going to get more of your sales from new products, and that is something that is the lifeblood of a manufacturing company going forward. Now, that's the good news. Some of the bad news we saw here and some of the help that manufacturers need is that in general, we found that manufacturers in this country are not measuring very well across these 6 strategies. This is an area where they're going to be looking, frankly, to benchmarking, to manufacturing extension partnerships, to financial institutions to offer them financial and operational benchmarks to see where they're at and where they need to measure up. For example, when we look at all these folks, we figured out a way to measure how sophisticated and advanced their measuring systems were. When we take a look at that, for example, for supply chain management, 26% of all manufacturers are not measuring whatsoever how well they're doing with their supply chain. This goes back to Peter Drucker 101, what gets measured gets done, what gets measured gets better. So if you're trying to help a manufacturer, one of the first things you can do is say, look, we've got some great metrics with other people we're working with. Let's see how you compare. Because that's a real way that you can get on the ground and really help these manufacturers work going forward. Another thing we found in the study was there's a lot of hype right now about going green. There's a lot of talk about being green and sustainable. A couple of things out of that. What we found is that the vast majority of manufacturers are not putting a lot of effort into this right now, perhaps not surprisingly given what has happened in the economy over the last several years. What we did find, though, is that the ones who are focusing on it are seeing significant opportunities for themselves. For example, we had 17% of manufacturers who've been able to reduce their annual energy usage by 10% or more. We've had a little under a quarter of manufacturers say that they've been able to reduce their use of non-recyclable products within their own products. So there is a huge opportunity there, and I believe that when companies are looking for financing, when they're trying to figure out how they're going to innovate going forward, one of the things they're going to be looking for is how can we find money, how can we find ways to invest in green, sustainable products going forward, because there's going to be a huge growth opportunity, not just in terms of the markets themselves, but also in terms of being able to improve their own processes going forward. Another interesting thing about manufacturers is one of the things, this was called the Next Generation Manufacturing Study. One of the things that we wanted to do was figure out, well, exactly who is running manufacturing. And we found that a quarter, 25% of all manufacturers already have a planned succession in place for the next 5 years. We had another 29% tell us that they might have a change at the top of their firm, which means you have 54% of U.S. manufacturers telling us that there is very likely to be a change at the top of their firms over the next 5 years. One of the interesting things about it is this is it's absolutely expected if you think about it, with the baby boomer generation getting close to retirement age, you're going to have an entirely new leadership base in manufacturing in this country, and there is a real opportunity to change the way things are done and to change the way that we view being globally competitive. This is a huge opportunity for manufacturers themselves and also for anybody who's working with manufacturers to help people take a new look at the way they do business and how they want to do their businesses going forward. So just real quick, we've talked very briefly about these 6 different strategies. What does a next generation strategy actually look like? How does somebody do it? What do they need to do? Well, just one example of this would be, for example, process improvement or process innovation. You know, how are we actually managing our business? What are we taking a look at that? And I know Petra earlier talked a little bit about some of the ways that manufacturers do business. What does a manufacturer look like? When you take a look at a manufacturer, I think there are 7 different things a manufacturer has to do going forward. They have to do research and development. They have to develop a new product. They have to do purchasing to get materials for that product. They have to process them. Typically, that's some sort of heat treatment or something. They have to do assembly. They have to distribute. They have to do sales and marketing. And they have to do service and support. One of the things that we look for when we're studying these firms is, are firms taking a look at where they can innovate, where can they improve their processes at any one of those steps along the way, and they're all going to be looking for help in that area. So if you're trying to help a manufacturer, if you're trying to work with them and ask them how are they doing, you're going to want to take a look at a number of key questions on each one of those activities. And I don't care whether you think there are 7 or I think Petra had a different number. There's a lot of different ways to look at a manufacturing firm. The important thing is the firms that we see doing great things and the ones that are great investments for the future are the ones who are taking a very hard look at this and asking themselves, what are our margins on this activity? If this was an activity, say processing or assembly or sales and service that we were doing on its own, are we making margin on it? Is this something we're world class in, or is this something that maybe we're not very good at when we need to outsource? One of the things that manufacturers need a lot of help with, as I mentioned earlier, they don't measure very well. They need to figure out what are the total costs for a given activity. How much does it cost us to take care of a customer? One of the things that we really like to see companies do is to take a hard look at a profit and loss statement, not just for the business as a whole, but for a customer segment or even for some of the larger customers themselves. Because most businesses, especially manufacturers, have some customers they've had for a long time that really they probably ought to get rid of because they're not making enough money, or they at least need to raise the rates for that customer. That's an area where I think manufacturers need a lot of assistance, and they're going to be looking, as I mentioned, to manufacturing extension partnerships, industrial resource centers, to financial institutions to help them do some of that budgeting, some of that analysis. So what does it mean to improve processes? Well, one of the things we look at is, what is a company doing? Are they doing lean manufacturing, which is a term that gets used quite a bit, Six Sigma? There's a variety of different ways for a manufacturing firm to get better. What we have found in all the research we've done, both in this study and in other studies, is that it doesn't matter so much which improvement methodology gets picked. It's, is there an improvement methodology, and what percentage of your workforce is engaged in it, and how broad is your implementation across the entire organization. In the Next Generation Study, for example, the companies that were world-class in process improvement, who were improving year on year, who were improving profitability, improving productivity, typically had a lot more of their employees involved in their improvement effort than companies who were not doing quite so well. Not surprisingly, these next generation companies who were close to being world-class or at or near world-class also were far more likely to be recording productivity gains over the last 3 years that were really outstanding. And we've got those numbers again. So what does that mean too? Well, it means if you're trying to implement this strategy, it's not enough for a company to tell you, well, we're going to do lean manufacturing, or we're going to do Six Sigma. You have to say, well, are you really doing that improvement methodology? Because we see a lot of companies right now telling us that they're doing lean, but you go in and you don't see the results. And why would that be? Well, typically it's because when a company starts putting in an improvement methodology, they start in one area. They do what's called a point implementation. They try it in one process, one area of the company, and there's only so much you can do there. Next, they move into, well, we want to put some sort of a system together. We're going to improve not just this one area, but we're going to improve how several areas link together in an overall process. We call that system implementation, or connecting different islands of excellence. And finally, when you see a company really doing this well, they've moved into an area where they've taken that improvement methodology, whether it's Lean, Six Sigma, et cetera, and they've moved into where it's part of the culture, it's part of the overall thinking. It's enterprise-wide, it's rooted into all the training they do, everything they do there. If I was somebody looking at a manufacturing firm and I'm trying to evaluate them, what I want to do is not just look at where they're at now, but what improvement methodology they've put in and how broad their implementation is across that entire company. So I think the question that all of us have to answer, for those of us who work with manufacturers, those of us who live in communities where manufacturing is important, is what are we going to do to help manufacturers get to the next generation? Because what the data says is that U.S. manufacturers can absolutely compete going forward, not just now, not just in 2015, but for decades beyond. It does mean, though, they're going to have to implement these 6 strategies. Those 6 strategies are customer-focused innovation, human capital development, superior processes and process improvement, supply chain management, green and sustainability, and global engagement. Our data also tells us that there are some manufacturers in any one of these areas who are doing pretty well already. There are people that we can learn from. There are people that other manufacturers can learn from. It also tells us, though, that there are a lot of manufacturers out there looking for help, and are desperate for any help they can get from anybody. What I'd like to say to you is please, help us make manufacturing in the United States be exactly what it should be and can be going forward. And I wish you luck. And if there's anything that we or the MEP system can do, please let us know. Thank you very much. Good day.